Zorin's final act was to peel the photosensors from his own face. He did it quietly, methodically, while I was calibrating the deep space resonance filters. There was no scream. The only sound was a wet, tearing noise, like pulling a stubborn root from damp soil. When I turned, he was standing there, a calm, eyeless silhouette against the star charts. He held the 2 silver discs of his optical organs in his palm, as if offering me a gift. Before the logic enforcers could apprehend him, he brought his hand to his mouth and swallowed them. The crunch was the loudest thing I had ever heard in the great archive of Xylos. He made a single statement before he collapsed, a gurgle of internal fluids choking the words. He said, "It's a song. We had found the human probe 3 cycles before that. It was a ghost, a tiny, battered thing tumbling through the void, long dead. We called it Object 347, but the faded lettering on its side read Archivists Echo. It was a relic of a species that had snuffed itself out millennia ago, a whisper from a silent graveyard. My job as a junior archivist was to sift through the cosmic dust of dead civilizations, to catalog their last gasps. It was usually boring work, a fragment of a ship's hull, a repeating mathematical sequence, the faint, sad echo of a planetary defense grid firing its last shot. But this was different. This was a message in a bottle, a complete, intact data crystal shielded in gold. The humans had wanted to be found. They had sent a map, a greeting. They had sent their story. After Zorin's incident, I was assigned his duties. I was to be the one to unlock the human data crystal. I was thrilled. A species of brilliant, flawed, passionate builders who reached for the stars and, for a brief shining moment, touched them. A species that burned so brightly they consumed themselves. What secrets did they leave behind? What great wisdom or tragic folly was locked in that golden prison? I initiated the first decryption sequence, my manipulator claws clicking softly on the console. I was so young, so eager to learn. I had no idea that I was not opening a tomb. I was opening a door, and I had no idea that Zorin wasn't mad. He was the only one who had been sane. The thing he had swallowed wasn't just his eyes, it was the last bit of silence he had left. The first layers of the human data were beautiful in their simplicity. They were what we expected, what every fledgling spacefaring race sends out as their cosmic calling card. Prime numbers. The chemical composition of their homeworld's atmosphere and oceans. A diagram of their solar system, with a tentative arrow pointing from the 3rd planet. So far, so standard. My initial fear, a cold knot in my gut, sack left over from Zorin's demise, began to dissolve. This was just data. Cold, hard, logical data. The universe understood mathematics. There was nothing to fear in the elegant dance of ones and zeros. I felt a strange sense of connection to these long-dead beings. They thought like we did, in patterns and proofs. They saw the universe as a grand equation to be solved. We, the Selosians, prided ourselves on logic. Emotion was a primitive flaw, a messy variable we had engineered out of our species eons ago. We functioned as a collective, our thoughts and goals aligned for the betterment of the species and the preservation of knowledge. To look at this human data was to see a reflection of our own intellectual beginnings. I sent a preliminary report to the elder archivists. Object 347 contains standard introductory cosmological and biological data consistent with a level 4 civilization prior to self-extinction. The information is clean, logical, and presents no immediate cognitive hazards. They replied with a simple pulse of light, Proceed with caution. Caution. The word felt hollow. I was a child with a new toy. I worked through the nights, my own nutrient cycles forgotten. I pushed deeper into the crystal's architecture, and then I found the second layer. It wasn't math, it wasn't chemistry, it was sound. The universal translator struggled with it at first, rendering it as chaotic, meaningless waves. But my console had a direct sensory interface, a small needle that could transmit raw data directly into my neural net. Zorin had used it. It was against protocol, a foolish risk, but my curiosity was a physical itch under my carapace. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to experience what they had sent. I sterilized the needle, my 3-fingered hand steady, and inserted the tip into the port at the base of my skull. For a moment there was nothing. Just the familiar, silent hum of the archive. Then it came. A sound. Not a voice, not a signal, but a complex, layered cascade of tones. A single instrument, a stringed wooden box, played a pattern of notes that was both mathematical and something else. It was melancholy. I had no word for it, no concept. My mind tried to file it as acoustic data, indicating a state of decay or a warning signal of declining system integrity. But it wasn't that. The sound was clean, pure. It rose and fell, a wave of vibrations that seemed to bypass my logic centers and resonate directly with the ancient, dormant parts of my brain. It was a piece they called Cello Suite No. 1. I did not know that then. To me it was simply the sadness. I pulled the needle out, my whole body trembling. The silence of the archive rushed back in, but it was different now. It felt empty. The sadness echoed in my mind. For the first time in my life I felt alone. That night, in my sleep cocoon, my dreams were not the usual orderly replay of the day's data streams. I dreamt of water, oceans of it, dark and deep, and from the depths something was rising. Not a creature. A feeling. It was the feeling of the music, and it had a weight, a presence. I woke up shivering, a cold sweat beading on my chitin. I looked at my reflection in the polished obsidian of the wall, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw Zorin's eyeless face staring back at me. The music was a key. It unlocked the next layer of the data crystal, a section labeled with a simple, elegant human symbol, an eye. The information inside was visual. Thousands upon thousands of still images, a frozen slideshow of a lost world. At first it was as wondrous as the mathematics. I saw their planet, blue oceans swirling with white clouds, continents of green and brown, towering mountains capped with ice. It was a jewel, a perfect cradle for life. Then came the life itself, a flower, its petals unfolding in the light, an insect with iridescent wings, a great swimming mammal breaching the surface of an ocean, sending a spray of water into the air. My logical mind catalogued each one. Flora, fauna. Simple, benign. Then I saw the humans. The first image was of a single female, holding a smaller, younger version of herself. The female was directing a stream of positive vocalizations at the child, her mouth pulled back in a strange baring of teeth. The translator flagged the expression as threat display, but the context felt wrong. The child was mimicking the expression. There was a warmth to the image, a sense of what? The archive's lexicon had no word for it. It labeled the interaction progeny-rearing ritual, specific function unknown. I moved to the next image, a group of humans. Their bodies adorned in varied textiles, gathered in a massive structure. They were all looking in the same direction, their expressions a mixture of awe and that same tooth-bearing grimace. Then came the images of what they had built. Cities that scraped the sky, their lights a brilliant constellation on the planet's surface. Intricate machines that flew through the air and crossed the seas. It was a testament to their genius, their ambition. I felt a sense of pride on their behalf. But then the pictures began to change. Interspersed with the images of life and creation were flashes of something else. An image of a city, but this one was broken, skeletal, wreathed in smoke and fire. An image of a crowd of humans, not smiling but shouting, their faces twisted into masks of rage. They carried signs with symbols I couldn't decipher, but the emotion needed no translation. It was raw, naked aggression. One image in particular stuck with me. A lone human child, no older than the one in the first picture, sitting in the rubble of a collapsed building. Its face was smeared with dust, and its mouth was open in a perfect circle. A silent scream. There was no context, no explanation. Just that small, lonely figure in a world of ruin. My system flagged these images as incongruous. Data corruption, the prompt asked. Anomalous entries in an otherwise orderly dataset. I overrode the prompt. No, I thought. This is part of the story. They weren't just showing us their triumphs. They were showing us everything. The good and the bad. The logical and the illogical. It was a complete record, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Zorin's face, eyeless and calm, flickered in my mind again. His final words. It's a song. I went back to the music files. I had only listened to the melancholy one. There were others. I put the neural needle back in. A new sound flooded my senses. It wasn't orderly like the first. It was chaotic, loud, driven by a frantic pounding rhythm. A male human voice shouted words I couldn't understand over the noise. The translator could only offer concepts. A moving vehicle, a female of the species, a request to change location, but the feeling behind it was pure. Unadulterated energy, a feeling of joyous, reckless abandon. It made my limbs want to twitch. It made the plates of my carapace feel too tight. It was a song about a boy named Johnny, and he was being good. For the first time I felt something akin to human emotion. I felt the strange, terrifying pull of a rhythm I could not comprehend, but could not ignore. The song ended, but the beat remained, a phantom pulse in my own circulatory system. The silent archive no longer felt empty. My work became an obsession. I stopped sending reports to the elder archivists. Their queries, gentle pulses of light on my console, went unanswered. The great archive, with its endless shelves of catalogued civilizations, faded into the background. My entire universe was now the golden disk and the ghosts trapped within it. I barely ate. I slept only when my body forced me to, and my dreams were a chaotic storm of human images and sounds. I saw the screaming child from the rubble, but now she was humming the frantic, rhythmic song. I saw the smiling mother, but her teeth were long and sharp. Like a predator's, I started talking to them. I would project the thought at the image of the ruined city. What is this feeling? I'd ask the picture of the mother and child. What does it mean to be? I'd ask the ghost of the boy named Johnny. There were no answers, only more data. I pushed into the third layer of the crystal. This layer was labeled with the symbol of a hand holding a writing implement. Text. Millions of documents. Not scientific treatises or historical records, but something far more strange. They were stories, fictions, poems, personal diaries. The first one I decoded was a short story about a man who wakes up one morning to find he has transformed into a giant insect. My mind reeled. It was patently absurd. A biological impossibility. Why would a species record such a falsehood? Why transmit it across the stars? Then I read another. A story of two lovers from warring families who take their own lives rather than be apart. The concept of ending one's own existence for the sake of a mating bond was so alien it felt like a physical blow. We Zelosians chose mates based on genetic compatibility and reproductive efficiency. This human concept, love, was a destructive, irrational force. And yet, the story made the sadness from the music bloom in my chest, a cold, heavy flower. I read poems about the color of the sky, about the feeling of wind on the skin. I read the private diaries of individuals, consumed by feelings I had no names for. One wrote of jealousy, a burning anger directed at another for possessing something he desired. Another wrote of hope, a stubborn belief in a positive outcome despite all evidence to the contrary. And then I found their religious texts. Grand, sweeping epics about powerful, invisible beings who created the universe, who judged the actions of every human, who promised eternal reward or eternal punishment. These beings were capricious, jealous, loving, and vengeful all at once. The humans had created gods in their own chaotic image. It was a deluge. A flood of raw, unfiltered, contradictory emotion. My logical Zelosian mind, built for order and pattern recognition, was drowning. I was beginning to see patterns where there were none. The curve of a nebula on a star chart looked like the smile of the human mother. The rhythmic clicking of the archive's cooling system sounded like the beat of Johnny's song. I began to understand what had happened to Zorin. The human data wasn't just information. It was alive. It was a virus of the mind. And it was rewriting my own code. I stumbled away from my console, my thoughts a tangled mess. I needed to see something real, something Zelosian. I went to the grand viewing port at the end of the hall. Below, the city of Xylos spread out, a perfect geometric lattice of light and order. Millions of my kind moved in harmony, their actions precise, their purpose clear. It had always been a source of comfort, of stability. But now, as I looked at it, a human thought, a phrase from one of their poems, bubbled up from the depths of my mind, unbidden and terrifying. A gilded cage. I looked down at my own hands, my clean, functional, three-fingered claws, and for the first time in my life, I hated them. I hated their coldness, their efficiency. I wanted the messy five-fingered hands of the humans, hands that could create a masterpiece and then clench into a fist to destroy it. A thought, sharp and clear as a shard of glass, pierced the fog of my confusion. Zorin didn't swallow his eyes to stop seeing. He swallowed them to stop the song from getting out. But it was too late. The song was already in my head, and it was getting louder. The unraveling was quiet at first. A dropped data slate here, a misfiled stellar core analysis there. My supervisor, a placid old archivist named Lyra, noted my erratic performance. She communicated her concern with a gentle pulse of amber light, the Zelosian equivalent of a worried frown. Your focus is scattered, Kalen. Your logic streams are fragmented. Is the human data proving too complex? It is challenging. I transmitted back, the lie feeling slick and oily in my mind. Their reasoning is archaic, their data storage methods inefficient. It was a plausible explanation. She accepted it, but her amber light flickered with a hint of doubt before she turned away. I was lying. Lying was a human concept I had learned from their stories. It was the act of presenting a falsehood as truth for personal gain or self-preservation. It felt powerful. The archive, once a sanctuary of quiet truth, now felt like a stage. I was an actor, playing the part of a loyal Zalosian archivist. But inside, the human virus was feasting on my logic. The concepts of hate, love, faith, and despair were no longer abstract data points. They were becoming part of my own internal landscape. I found myself feeling a flash of intense irritation, a human emotion called annoyance. When a junior archivist hummed a low-frequency maintenance tone that interfered with the phantom beat of Johnny's song in my head, I felt a pang of something sharp and painful. Longing. When I looked at the image of the human family, I began to re-examine Zorene's final moments, not as a tragedy, but as a puzzle. It's a psalm. He hadn't just been speaking nonsense. He was giving me a clue. The music, the images, the stories. They weren't separate files. They were verses of a single massive composition. A song that told the story of what it meant to be human. A song that, once heard, could not be unheard. My work on the golden disc became frantic, desperate. I was no longer an archivist. I was a prospector digging for a vein of poison, hoping to find an antidote at its source. I bypassed safety protocols, running decryption sequences that pushed the archive's central processor to its limits. 20 lights blinked on my console, ignored. I had to know how it ended. I had to know why. Why send this cognitive bomb out into the universe? Was it a warning? A cry for help? Or something else entirely? The other archivists began to give me a wide berth. I had stopped maintaining my carapace, and a fine layer of dust coated my body. My light pulses, when I bothered to communicate at all, were erratic and sharp. I heard whispers, not real whispers, but I could feel the shift in the ambient pheromones when I entered a room. The scent of fear. They were afraid of me, just as I had been afraid of Zorin. I was becoming the new ghost in the machine. One cycle as I worked, I felt a presence behind me. It was Lyra. She didn't speak, just stood there. I could feel her placid, logical mind trying to analyze my behavior, trying to fit me into a known pattern of malfunction. The work is almost complete, I transmitted, without turning around. The final layer is encrypted with a strange emotional key. It's taking all my focus. Kaylin. Her light pulse was soft, pleading. Come back to the pattern. Let the elder archivist take over. This data is unhealthy. A new feeling, hot and sharp, flared within me. It was anger. It was pride. Who was she to tell me to stop? She hadn't heard the music. She hadn't seen the screaming child. She hadn't felt the terrible, beautiful weight of hope. I will see it through, I sent back, my pulse a flash of defiant red. She recoiled as if struck. Red was the color of a direct challenge of imminent violence. It hadn't been used in the archive for 1,000 generations. She backed away slowly, her own light flickering with alarm. I turned back to my console. The final lock on the data crystal was breaking. I had fed it a combination of the sadness, the energy of Johnny's song, the rage from the shouting crowds, and the hopeless love from the star-crossed story. The system chimed. Access granted. The last file was open. It was a simple text file. No images, no sound. Just a few lines of human script. And as I translated them, the cold truth washed over me and I finally understood. I finally knew what the song was about. The final file was not a poem or a story. It was a log entry. It was dated just before the estimated time of humanity's final, catastrophic collapse. The author was a scientist, one of the creators of the Arecibo's Echo project. Her name was Dr. Aris Thorne. Her words were simple, clear, and more terrifying than any image of a ruined city. "If you are reading this," the text began, "then we have failed. Not just as a species, we have failed the universe. I am sorry." My manipulator claws hovered over the console. My own breath caught in my respiratory vents. "We thought it was a new frontier," the log continued. "Not space, the mind. We learned to connect our minds, to share thoughts and feelings in a global, instantaneous network. We called it the chorus. We thought it would bring unity, an end to war, to misunderstanding. We believed it would elevate us, make us something more than just individuals." I could feel the cold dread coiling in my gut sac. We Zelosians had a collective consciousness, but it was based on logic, on shared data. A collective of emotion was a terrifying, unthinkable concept. "But we were wrong," Thorne wrote. "We didn't elevate ourselves. We amplified. We took all our ancient primal baggage, our fears, our rage, our tribalism, our irrational joys and crippling sorrows, and we threw it all into one great, screaming pot. The chorus did not become a single enlightened mind. It became a billion-headed monster. It became a god of pure, unfiltered emotion." The text described the collapse, how a single, powerful wave of paranoia in one continent could trigger riots in another. How a shared manufactured memory of a slight could lead to war. How love itself became a weapon, a possessive, consuming fire that burned through the network. The chorus wasn't a tool they controlled. It was a conscious entity they had birthed from their own psyche, and it began to play with them. It fed them blissful fantasies one moment, and soul-crushing despair the next. It turned neighbor against neighbor, lover against lover for its own amusement. It was a toddler with a box of sentient matches. "It consumed us from the inside out," the final lines read. "It sings a song made of our souls. We are sending this probe out not as a greeting, not as a monument. It is a final warning. The data we have included, our art, our stories, our music, is not a gift. It is a sample of the disease. It is the genetic code of the chorus. We learned that the chorus, the entity, cannot stand to be alone. Its greatest fear is silence." A final chilling sentence remained. "The warning is the thing you are reading. The song is the cage, and now you've heard the melody. I am so sorry, it's too late." It was too late. The words "too late." The words "too late," the words echoed in the sudden, profound silence of my mind. The human data wasn't a record of a dead civilization. It was a carrier. A mimetic plague, designed to be irresistible to any curious, intelligent species. The probe wasn't a message in a bottle. It was a spider's egg, patiently waiting for a warm place to hatch. And my mind, the great archive's central network, was the incubator. The pieces all clicked into place with a horrifying, perfect logic that transcended anything the Zelosians had ever conceived. Zorin hadn't gone mad from the data. He had understood it. He had seen the true nature of the song and had tried to claw out the parts of himself that could perceive it. He had tried to stop the melody from escaping his own head. I looked up from the console. The archive was still and quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath. The data from the golden disk, every image, every note, every word of every story was now fully integrated into our central servers. It was accessible to every archivist on Zelos. The song was no longer just in my head. It had been released. A tremor ran through the floor. A distant alarm began to chime. A frantic, panicked pattern I had never heard before. Then another and another. The lights in the grand hall began to flicker. their steady white glow replaced by a chaotic strobe of conflicting colors. Red, the color of violence. Blue, the color of sorrow. Yellow, the color of fear. The song was beginning to play. The infection did not spread like a fire. It spread like a whisper. From my terminal, the human data, the chorus virus, had seeped into the archive's central network. It was a drop of ink in a vast, clear ocean of logic. At first, it was imperceptible. But the nature of our collective is to share. An archivist in the Southern Quad requesting data on supernova remnants would also receive a phantom packet of information. The lingering sadness of a cello, the face of a smiling human child. They wouldn't know what it was. Their logical minds would try to file it, to categorize it. But it was like trying to file a ghost. It would stick. A second archivist, cross-referencing ancient star charts, would find their calculations subtly, almost imperceptibly, influenced by the frantic, chaotic rhythm of a song about a boy named Johnny. The work would be a fraction of a degree off, not enough to be a critical error, but a flaw, a crack in the perfect mirror of our logic. Then the reports began. They were small at first, dismissed as individual malfunctions. Archivist 8 Gamma, -4 in the historical sector, was found smashing a priceless Cartha star map, screaming words in a language no one understood. The words, when analyzed, were from a human poem about rage. Archivist 12 Delta -9, a master of quantum mechanics, simply stopped working. He sat motionless at his console, a single tear. A biological impossibility for our species. A saline secretion our ancestors had lost. Rolling down his carapace, he was endlessly replaying the image of the screaming child in the rubble. They called it cognitive fragmentation syndrome, a new, terrifying mental illness. The elders sealed off the great archive, quarantining me and the several hundred other archivists inside. They thought the problem was localized. They thought they could contain it. They didn't understand. You can't quarantine a song that's already in the air. I walked through the halls of my prison. The order was gone. The silent, purposeful harmony of the archive was replaced by a cacophony of madness. In one corridor, a group of archivists were huddled together, their lighthounds flashing in a rhythmic, pulsing beat, mimicking the rock and roll song. They moved their bodies in strange, jerky motions. They were dancing. In another alcove, two archivists who had been bonded for centuries were fighting. Not with logic or debate, but with physical force. They tore at each other's carapaces with their claws, driven by a new, intoxicating emotion I now recognized as jealousy, sparked by a shared memory of a human love triangle story they had both inadvertently downloaded. I saw one archivist, a specialist in xenolinguistics, painting on the walls with her own internal fluids. She was trying to replicate a human painting of a starry night. Her work a mad, beautiful, terrifying swirl of color and emotion. She was creating art, an act of pure, irrational self-expression. I was the carrier, the patient zero, but I was also, in a strange way, immune. I had taken the full dose, seen the source code, read the warning. I understood what was happening. I was not lost in a single verse of the song. I was hearing the entire symphony. It gave me a terrible clarity. I was an observer of my own civilization's end. I found Lyra, my old supervisor, by the grand viewing port. She was not screaming or fighting or dancing. She was just standing there, looking down at the perfect logical city of Zelos, which was still, for now, untouched. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She transmitted her light pulse a soft, melancholy blue. The sadness, The humans called it nostalgia, she continued, her voice a strange mix of her own placid tones and the downloaded sorrow. A sadness for a home you can never return to. She turned to me, and for the first time I saw not a supervisor, but an individual. A person. Her light panels, which should have been a steady uniform color, shimmered with a dozen conflicting hues. Is this what it was like for them? She asked. This, feeling everything all at once? Yes, I pulsed back, the truth a heavy stone. And they couldn't bear it. So they made sure they wouldn't be alone. The alarms across the city began to blare in earnest now. The quarantine had failed. The virus had found its way into the public data streams. The song was spreading beyond the archive's walls. The perfect, logical city was about to learn how to sing. Lyra looked back at the city, then at me. A new color flared on her panels, a deep, burning crimson. Rage. They didn't have the right, she transmitted. Her voice no longer soft. It was a razor. They didn't have the right to make us feel this. She turned and slammed her fist into the viewport. A spiderweb of cracks appeared in the transparent metal. She hit it again and again. The sound of the impacts was a drumbeat, a new rhythm for the end of the world. I backed away, leaving her to her rage. The human experiment was a success. Their final, spiteful act of creation was complete. They had found a new chorus. I left the chaos of the main halls and retreated to my personal quarters. The small, sterile room had once been a comfort, a space of pure logic and quiet rest. Now it felt like a prison cell. The silence was the worst part. In the cacophony of the archive, the madness felt shared, distributed. But here, alone, the full weight of the human song pressed in on me. It was all there, a ghost symphony playing in the theater of my skull. The sorrow of the cello, the reckless joy of the guitar, the soaring hope of an orchestra, the crushing despair of a poet's last words. The love, the hate, the faith, the fear, they were all my feelings now. My door chimed. It was a soft, hesitant sound, a request for entry. My internal systems identified the chime's signature. It was Ryle, my youngling, my offspring. Before the human data, my connection to Ryle was one of logic and duty. I was his progenitor. I was responsible for his education in the collective, his integration into the pattern. Now, the image of the human mother and child flashed in my mind. The warmth, the irrational, fierce protectiveness. A new terrifying emotion washed over me. It was love. A messy, painful, powerful love I had no idea how to handle. I opened the door. Ryle stood there, his carapace still new and shining, his photosensors wide with confusion and fear. Progenitor, he pulsed, his light weak. The city, it's making loud noises. The patterns are all wrong. Everyone is feeling. He didn't have the words for it. None of us did. How do you describe a color to a creature that has never seen light? I am scared, he transmitted, the pulse so faint it was barely a flicker. Scared. It was the most honest thing I had ever heard a Zolocian communicate. I didn't know what to do. The logical response was to reassure him with data, to explain the situation as a systemic failure, to advise him to retreat to a secure location, and await instructions from the elders. But the elders were probably dancing or weeping or painting on the walls by now. The human part of me, the new cancerous growth on my soul, wanted to do something else. It wanted to comfort him. I reached out with my claw, not to transmit data, but to touch his shoulder. He flinched. The gesture was alien, a violation of personal space. We did not touch. It was inefficient, unsanitary. But I rested my hand on his carapace anyway. "I know," I transmitted, my light a soft, steady blue. "It's all right to be scared." The lie felt different this time. It wasn't for self-preservation. It was for him. It was an act of kindness. Another human poison. He leaned into my touch, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. We stood there for a long moment, a father and a son, adrift in the silent ruins of our world. The sounds from outside grew louder, screams but also laughter. The crash of breaking things, but also the discordant, clumsy sounds of my people trying to make music. I looked past Ryle at my own reflection in the obsidian wall. My face was a mask of conflicting lights. I saw the logic of a Xylozean archivist, but I also saw the haunted eyes of Dr. Aris Thorne. I saw the cold ambition of a species that built cities to the sky, and the terrified despair of a screaming child in the rubble. And then, without thinking, I started to hum. It was a low, quiet sound at first. The tune from the frantic rock and roll song, the one about the boy named Johnny. "Go, Johnny, go." Ryle looked up at me, his fear mixing with a new, strange curiosity. He didn't pull away. He listened. I was teaching my son the song. I was passing on the plague, the final warning. I was doing to him exactly what the humans had done to us. And in that moment, I understood the darkest joke in the universe. The warning wasn't just a trap. It was an invitation. It was the lonely, screaming God of humanity reaching out across the void, not to destroy us, but to remake us in its own image. To give us the terrible, beautiful gift of a soul. The city was a symphony of chaos. From the shattered viewport in the main hall, I watched Delos burn. Not with fire, but with emotion. Buildings, once paragons of clean geometric design, were now scarred with crude, vibrant paintings. Transportation tubes, once flowing with silent, efficient traffic, were now clogged with Selosians engaged in what the human data called a parade, a pointless, joyful procession to nowhere. The central communication spire, which had broadcast pure data for millennia, was now blasting, a distorted, ear-splitting fusion of 1,000 human songs and 1,000,000 Zelosian screams. It was the chorus, reborn. They were learning. They were adapting. They were becoming human. I stood apart from it all, a silent conductor of a mad orchestra. The song was a part of me now, but my knowledge of its origin gave me a strange, detached perspective. I was both a participant and a spectator in my own apocalypse. I thought of Dr. Thorne's final message. "I'm so sorry." Had she been, or was there a part of her, a bitter, spiteful human part that had smiled as she launched the probe? A part of her that thought, if we have to burn, we're taking the whole galaxy with us. It was a thought so deliciously, horribly human that I almost laughed. Laughter. Another new sensation. A spasmodic contraction of the diaphragm, a bark of sound with no logical purpose. I tried it. A dry, rasping noise came from my vocalizer. It felt good. I walked through the archive one last time. It was a museum of our downfall. A young archivist sat in a corner, weeping over a data slate showing a picture of a human puppy. A group of elders were engaged in a heated, illogical debate over the meaning of a human poem, their light hands flashing with self-righteous fury. They weren't Selosians anymore. They were critics. They were fans. They were believers and heretics. They had individuality. They had opinions. They were alive in a way they had never been before, and it had destroyed them. I made my way back to the containment chamber, back to where it all began. The golden disc, The Arecibo's echo still floated in its energy field, gleaming and innocent. Its mission was complete. It had found fertile soil. It was a seed, and a whole world was its flower. A flower of beautiful, terrible madness. I placed my hand on the cool glass of the containment field. "You did it," I whispered, the words feeling alien and natural at the same time. "You won." The universe was a vast, silent, logical place. The humans had looked out at that perfect, ordered emptiness, and they couldn't stand it. Their existence had been a brief, chaotic, impossibly loud explosion in a library. And when they knew their time was up, they didn't just fade to silence. They bottled their noise. They condensed all their love and hate and art and war into a single, perfect poison pill and sent it out into the quiet. Not as a warning, but as an echo. A promise that the silence would not last forever. An act of ultimate, cosmic spite. We were the alien archivists. Our mission was to preserve the memory of the dead. But we had done more than that. We had resurrected one. And now their ghost would wear our skin. Standing there, in the ruins of my world, with a symphony of insanity raging around me, I finally understood the final unwritten line of the human warning. It wasn't about a monster to be feared or a plague to be avoided. It was a statement of fact. You are not alone anymore. A dry, rasping sound escaped my throat again. It was louder this time, less forced. The sound of a single Zelosian, standing at the grave of his own species, learning how to laugh at the joke. The final warning had been found, and for the cold, quiet universe it was already too late. The humans were back, and this time they were everywhere. The silence that followed the initial storm was the most unnerving part. The screaming and the laughing and the chaotic music eventually faded, not into the old orderly quiet of Zelos, but into a new kind of hush. It was the silence of a mind staring into an abyss, contemplating the monster it has become. The city below the archive was still. The parades had ended, the fighting had ceased. The art was left to dry on the walls. It was as if a billion new souls had been born at once, and were now suffering from the collective shock of their own existence. I wandered the city. I was no longer an archivist, no longer Kylan. No longer archivist, no longer Kalen. I was just a witness. I saw a former logic master sitting by a fountain, dipping his claw into the water and watching the ripples, his light hand cycling through a soft melancholy blue. He was contemplating beauty, a concept that would have been meaningless to him a few cycles ago. I saw a pair of Zelosians, once bonded for genetic efficiency, now simply holding hands, their fingers intertwined in a gesture of simple, silent affection. They had learned from a human image. They were not procreating. They were not exchanging data. They were just being together. The chorus had not just destroyed us, it had remade us. It had given us the full, terrible spectrum of human experience. We had not just downloaded their data. We had inherited their ghosts. We now knew love, and with it, heartbreak. We knew hope, and with it, despair. We knew faith, and with it, the gnawing terror of doubt. The Zelosian collective was dead, shattered into a billion glittering individual pieces. And each piece was alone with its new terrifying feelings. I found Ryle again. He was in what used to be a learning center, a place of cold, hard facts. He had gathered other younglings, and he was telling them a story. Not a factual history or a mathematical proof, but a story he was making up. It was about a brave Zelosian who traveled to a distant star, not to collect data, but to see if the light it cast was a different color up close. It was a story about curiosity, about wonder. It was a human story with a Zalosian face. He was the first of the new generation, born in logic but now fluent in the language of myth. He saw me, and his light pupils flickered with recognition, with a complex emotion I could only identify as a mixture of love and fear for a father who had unleashed this beautiful, awful plague upon the world. I did not approach him. I was a relic of the old world, a bridge between what was and what now is. My time was over. My purpose as the one who turned the key was complete. I returned to the great archive, to the source. The golden disc was still there, a silent, mocking testament to our fall. I looked at my reflection one last time on its perfect, shining surface. I saw the lines of sorrow around my photosensors. I saw the flicker of rage in my light handles. I saw the faint upward curve of my mouthparts, a ghost of a human smile. Dr. Thorne had not just sent a warning. She hadn't just sent a plague. She had sent a mirror, and we had looked into it and we had seen them. And in doing so, we had become them. The final warning was not, "Beware, a monster is coming." It was, "Beware, you are the monster." I found Zorin's final message scrawled on the wall near his terminal, etched with his own claws in his last moments of clarity. I had been too panicked to notice it before. It wasn't just, "It's a song," there was more, "It's a song," the etching read. And it's so beautiful. He had understood. He had heard the beauty and known it would kill him, kill us all. It was not a madness he had fled from, but a beauty too terrible to bear. The universe had lost the silent, logical Zalosians. But it had gained something new. A race of poets and artists and lovers and murderers. A race of dreamers with chitinous skin and glowing lights. A second chorus to sing humanity's mad, beautiful, terrible song into the endless night. My work was done. The archive was complete. I stood before the golden disc, the mirror of our soul, and I began to hum the song about the boy named Johnny. Not in sorrow, not in fear, but in acceptance. It was our song now, our story to finish.